thrilled to be with the members of District 61 and whoever else might be listening or joining in today. I recognize some of the names on the screen, so welcome to each one of you. So a bit about how I came around to this whole topic and my passion for it and my background, first of all, briefly. My career in the corporate world was in adult education, and in the corporations where I worked or in the government agencies, I was responsible for learning and development, organizational development, training, professional development, leadership, management skills, on and on. So anything right from the very technical training and bringing in trainers to teach Excel all the way up to as technical as you could get, as well as all the soft skills and project management, conflict resolution, etc. So I spent my career working in that field, and as I sat, being a Toastmaster at that time, sat and looked at how I bought training, what I brought into the corporation that I was responsible for. I had the budget, I had the autonomy, I had the needs of the corporation, which I did a needs assessment for, and then my mandate each year was to meet the needs, the training needs, the professional development needs of the people within the corporation, so we could continue to be an outstanding corporation providing world-class service. So as I contemplated the various people and vendors that came into my office to sell us training, curriculum, I thought, how would I respond to most of the Toastmasters that I've had the opportunity to go out with on corporate visits and how they present themselves? And my assessment was that there was quite a gap, that the people that I tended to hire to present in my corporate world, because I felt ownership and responsibility of it, that they looked and sounded quite a bit differently than the Toastmasters who were club growth directors or somebody at the district level who decided that they would go into the corporate world and talk about Toastmasters. So it led me to assess what didn't work, and in terms of our delivery and our placement of Toastmasters in the corporate world, but also training needs that we could provide for the corporation. And I looked at that in terms of how we sold them, that we could address their training needs, and as well as being super clear on what their responsibilities were and our responsibilities were in that partnership. And I really started to see it as a partnership, because as I sat in that corporate responsible chair, I wanted some access and some responsibility and some input into that training. I didn't want to necessarily hire someone that then disappeared, and I never knew the results. I didn't know the outcome. I didn't know the status. I didn't know if there were challenges. I didn't know the attendance. And those were all things that were really important for me, because as a corporation, we needed to know return on investment. We needed to know if people were actually showing up for the training and what their takeaways were, and if they were applying what they were learning. So it all coupled with my experience of being involved in corporate clubs at that time, late in the 1980s, where I first got involved with corporate clubs, and going in particular in that era was going into IT companies to teach people really communication skills, not a lot of leadership skills, but a lot of communication skills. So the book I've written, entitled, let me think what the title of the book is. It's a long title, A Handbook for Building and Sustaining Vibrant Toastmasters Programs in Corporations. It was the culmination of a lot of years of me thinking and talking about this, and people kept saying to me, why don't you just put it all down in one place? And so I finally did that this past summer and published the book in August. So I want to share with you some of the highlights, high-level sharings around things to consider if you are a member of a corporate club, or if you are looking at creating a corporate program for Toastmasters in the corporations, or if you're just curious. And hopefully I'll share some things that'll tweak your minds for each one of you with different mindsets. So first of all, a couple of things, basic qualifications that I look for if I'm being asked to go into a corporation, or if I'm looking around my district, driving through the cities, looking at big buildings. I want to know what corporation has over 200 employees. And it's a matter of sustainability. So the corporation, the last corporation I worked in, had 550 employees, a good size corporation for a sustainable Toastmaster program. So it has to have a minimum 200 employees who are on site and not shift workers. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but mainly it is sustainability. If they're off site, they might be able to be virtually joining, and that's another option nowadays. But shift workers, you're really then looking at however many people are on shift at one time, and it becomes, for me, in my experience, it becomes unworkable unless there's a lot of people. So I've tried to put these into hospitals where we've got nursing staff working on shifts, and we couldn't sustain it. As soon as we got administration involved, again, we had a stable base and we could make it work. So the basic qualifications to be aware of when we go into form a club, and this is anywhere whether we're creating a corporate program or a community club, is that there has to be a minimum of 12 meetings held per year. So I really highly recommend, and for me, when I'm involved, it's not even optional, that the corporate program meets weekly. There's going to be people that have to miss because of work, there's going to be scheduling difficulties, there's going to be other pressures, there's going to be travel for work. And so if they're learning a skill that is actually practiced, experiential learning, to hold those sessions once a week so that they can have regular opportunity to practice. There must be a minimum of manual speeches or project speeches, as well as oral evaluations at every meeting to actually meet the requirements of the Toastmasters program. And of course, the maintaining of a minimum, and I don't even want to say the minimum, so anywhere from 25 to 35 people in the program at all times. That becomes the responsibility of the corporation, and it becomes one of those conditions of satisfaction that they're required to make sure happen. And I'll talk more about that later on. I also state up front that if people want to be the leaders in the communication and leadership program that Toastmasters is offering to bring into that workplace as part of the professional development, that they're required to go to mandatory leadership training, and that will be outside of the regular work hours. So I'm right up front about that, so that they know that twice a year they'll be going to some leadership training. And then also the opportunity for those in leadership to understand that the advanced leadership program that is offered really happens at the area, the division, the district, the regional, and the international level, so that the people in the Toastmasters program, even in the corporate world, get to understand that they belong to a global organization, that it's not just something that's down the hall in their corporation that they go to on Tuesdays at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, but that this is part of a global organization, 146 countries of the world, and meeting hundreds of thousands of people's needs, and millions of people's gone through the program. So that's some of the things that, just before I even look at an organization, I want to know if they meet those basic needs. A couple of other things that I really am curious about if I'm going to meet with an organization, and I may find this out during my very first visit with them, and I prefer this to be face-to-face, is I'm going to be curious as to what their current training policy is for their employees. Do they have a reimbursement system when their employees take any kind of training? Do they have time off work, or do they go to that training during work hours? If they attend training outside of work hours, how do they compensate their employees for that? And so I'm always curious about that, so I understand the baseline and what kind of policies do they have in place in the corporation to actually cover the training needs and how that's done for consistency. So a few basic qualifications for going into a corporation. The first meeting, as I stated, at the first meeting when I go into the corporation, I have some basic questions about how they basically set up their training in terms of promoting it, what their policies are that guide training and professional and development for cost, time. Certainly the money and time are always the important things to cover, because we're going to ultimately be signing some kind of an agreement with them, which currently looks like an application to form a Toastmasters club, but in fact it is a contract that they're bringing the curriculum into their workplace. So we want to look at that. We want to look at what kind of recognition programs do they have in their corporation, where potentially some of their outstanding employees in the Toastmasters program could be recognized. We want to look at, have they targeted a special section of their corporation that they want to send to Toastmasters programs because of it being communication and leadership training. This is a really important point in terms of who they want to send, because some corporations actually say we want to send all our managers, we want to send all our supervisors, because they've already identified a target audience. And sometimes that's worth a discussion, and sometimes they've really made up their minds. So I'm just willing to explore that and ask them how they came to that, and if they could sustain the program with that target audience, and how they would handle if other people came forward that were interested in joining it. So I look at that. I also talk to them about the accountability. If they're sending employees to training, how do they hold their employees accountable, and talk about putting it into the performance review or performance development plans of the individual employees. This is one thing that I did in the corporation where I worked, is I set up a draft agreement between the supervisor or the manager of the employee that was in Toastmasters. And that was set up so that they could talk about the expectations throughout. The couple of things that I covered in that agreement were the percentage of attendance that I expected on the behalf of the employee that I was funding and allowing time to go to the Toastmasters program. I actually had an expectation of them attending a minimum of 75% of the sessions that were held. I also had an expectation that in a 6-month period that they would deliver a minimum of 3 project speeches, and that they would deliver anywhere from 6 to 9 other assignments within the meetings. And again, it depended on the employee and how new they were to the program, etc. So the gradient may have been higher for more advanced people in the program. And then if they were on the leadership team or the executive of that program as well, being in a leadership role, I had expectations that they would attend a minimum of 80% of the executive meetings of that leadership group, and that they would, whatever the parameters were around that they would attend that outside leadership training that was mandatory. So I had very specific requirements of them for accountability, and that was just the structure, again being sensitive to what the corporation where I worked required of employees in training. And so I just mirrored that into the Toastmasters program. One of the major differences that, I want to go to talk a bit about some of the differences that I see between community clubs and corporate programs. And this is part of the paradigm shift, as I see it, from going to what is a group of people from various walks of life, different backgrounds, coming together because they are self-motivated, they drive themselves there or come on transit, however they get there under their own will, and they're intrinsically motivated to be there, versus in corporate programs, you often have people that are sent, you may have people that are encouraged, you could even have people that show up because it'll look good. And so you might have different motivations, also a lot of autonomous people could come together. Not always, but sometimes we could all start to look alike when we get into the corporate program. So there's some differences there. The other things that I really noticed when I was looking at corporate Toastmasters in the corporate world was that my judgment was that we basically took a community club and we took the agenda and all the things that we do and all our approaches and all our titles and all our techniques and styles, and we plunked it into the corporate world with very little or no thought as to whether it actually fit and made sense for them. And this is where the huge breakdown for me was, because what I discovered was when we put the community club in the corporation, we had the members of the club sometimes literally walking the hallways asking people to come to Toastmasters, which never happened for training in any other program in the corporate world where I worked. The participants in the course did not ask other people to come to it. So I thought that was really needed to be changed, and that responsibility had to go over to the corporation to determine who would go and who they would fund and give time to go to. And yes, employees could also ask their supervisors if they could attend that training. But it was really the responsibility of the corporation to provide the minimum before the sessions were canceled, of 20 attendees at all sessions. So that was important differentiation for me. The next thing I noticed was that the difficulty in getting things paid for. And that's why I realized that having a policy in the corporation that dealt with, or an agreement of how the Toastmasters program would be funded and managed, would be critical, because then the person who was responsible for finances would actually have a discussion with the Toastmasters representatives and be able to pay that tuition through the same process as they would pay any other training bills that would come in. So it's setting it up again the way it's normally set up. Some of the other community club characteristics that I discovered when I went into corporations was that the person who had created the community club inside a corporation had basically taken their community club agenda and put it into the corporation. And in some cases, this may have worked, but my test for this was, if the CEO of that corporation was standing in the room watching everything that took place in that session around communication and leadership, would their judgment be that this was a quality program that was training their people in communication and leadership? And there were a few things that I had problems with that I couldn't have defended to my CEO. One of those was some clubs have what is called a quiz master. And it feels like a bit of a game, and I know it supports listening, but I would not have that in my corporate agenda. I would not have invocation, because I've never had invocation, or in America, in the United States of America, a Pledge of Allegiance. Never has that happened in any training programs in corporations that I've ever been in. So it was those things to look at it and say, if this is communication and leadership and this is experiential learning, let me look with that lens at each item on that agenda and say, are we doing communication? Are we doing leadership? And so it came down for me that a grammarian, yes, to make sure that we're grammatically correct. And they could actually create a franchise on us in that alone in most industries nowadays, because grammar is abysmal. So a grammarian would be paramount. Speaking, doing as many formal presentations out of our pathways that we possibly can, and evaluations. Again, evaluations looking at critical listening and thinking skills. Impromptu speaking, again, a skill that's vital in the corporate world. So those were the elements that I came down to say, those are paramount to be in this program. And the rest, I didn't feel, me personally, in my experience, was that the rest didn't fit in. The evaluators all fit, the grammarian, the impromptu speaking, and even the evaluation of impromptu speaking, which isn't done consistently in all programs, but certainly I felt that there was an evaluation, or that there was space for evaluation of impromptu speaking, again, because of the mental capacity and skills in evaluating that it requires to actually evaluate 6 or 7 or maybe 5 impromptu speakers in that period of time. So I felt that that was very worthwhile. So those are some of the things when I looked at the agenda. And I really felt that my stand on this is that the district has a large role to play in this. And I get that this is all new and it's just starting blocks, and some districts are adopting it and some individuals are adopting it. So the take-up is quite variable, and that's fine. So what I looked at was, well, I went back to say, what is our language? Going back to basics, what is our language when we go into the corporation? To meet first with the corporation about what their training needs are and how our communication and leadership program might meet their needs. And there were a number of words. We talk Toastmasters speak. And what I know is that when we have brand new guests, we do a lot of interpreting our Toastmasters speak in those first few meetings for them, because they don't know what we're talking about. Table topics doesn't mean anything. CTM or CC or DTM, none of our designations mean anything to anyone other than the Toastmasters who have them. So I proposed list of words to substitute in the corporate world. And knowing that there's not just one right answer for this, but looking at what does the corporation call theirs, so that we could call ours that, so we fit in. We want to match them. And one of the things I found consistently, and I find this even in our community clubs, is the word dues. Dues in lots of corporations means professional dues, that where you belong to an organization. And in fact, some corporations actually have a policy against paying people's professional dues. And so I use the word tuition. Toastmasters internationally in their corporation papers actually say that we're a not-for-profit education organization. And any organization I've gone to, college, university, school, where I pay to take training, I pay tuition. So I use the word tuition for when I talk to them about paying tuition for the program. I don't talk about manuals or pathways, because that doesn't mean anything to the corporation. And the people that are buying from me or you really don't care. They want to know that you've got a curriculum and how does it cover things? How is it delivered? So I talk about an online curriculum, and as soon as people are registered for the program, they're given their passwords and assistance in getting into accessing the online curriculum. So I talk about curriculum and the fact that our curriculum has learning objectives, so people actually learn 2 objectives, and that it's designed with adult education principles in mind, which is important for them to know. When we talk about club officer training for our corporate clubs, I talk about leadership training for the corporate programs. This is because they'll have a leadership team rather than a club officers. And that leadership training, again, is the responsibility of the district to provide. So it's something else that the district ultimately would provide to people from the corporate world that come for leadership training to their TLI or club officer training, whatever it might be, Training Leader Institute. I talk about evaluations. I sometimes talk about it feedback, and I interchange that with evaluations because it's pretty transferable. But at the very beginning, I tend to refer more to feedback than evaluation. And then milestones. I talk, if people have got a distinguished Toastmaster or a CC and they maybe guess, I let people know that we're talking about milestones, that there's various milestones that we'll achieve throughout the program. So you'll meet a milestone and then you can go on to another stage of development or into another project area. So I really tend to get the Toastmaster jargon out of the program. I talk about the sessions because I look at in the corporation that we have a course, and within that course we have sessions, and people come to the sessions. Meetings mean something entirely different in the corporate world, and most people don't sign up for more of those, so I don't refer to Toastmasters as meetings, but I talk to them about training sessions. I never use the word club. Again, a very different meaning in the corporate world. It might be a fitness club or a squash club or a chess club, but Toastmasters is an education program, so I talk about communication and leadership program, and that's what I sell. I never say the word public speaking, never. The corporate world, the world I worked in the corporate world, would not buy a public speaking course. Absolutely not. Communication and leadership, yes, because they're very difficult to find, particularly the leadership, and I would buy that. Thus, we get to club officers in a community club, and here I call them the leadership or the executive board. So whatever you want to call them. And then I even actually changed some of the roles or the titles of the leadership roles within the program. The Distinguished Club program, I actually talk about critical success factors or the KPI, the key performance indicators, goals. Those are the words that I use when we're talking about setting strategic direction, managing to objectives. And that's really what we're teaching the leadership team with the Distinguished Club program. Members from a community club now are referred to as participants in a training program. So they're participants. And you may have some other questions around jargon and translating jargon, but those are some of the main ones that I change. And again, when I'm in the corporation, I listen very carefully and ask a lot of questions about how their training is set up and how they run it. And I start to let my language reflect the language that they use in their corporation. So we really need to be adaptable to their environment. So back to that, again, further to that meeting that we're having with the corporation, Some people get really concerned and say, well, I'm not a salesperson. And I would say that I'm not a salesperson either, except every time we stand up, we're selling ourselves and who we are and the skills that we've got. And if we appear to be unskilled, we're probably not going to sell what we're representing. But I really like to think of the Toastmasters program as selling itself. It's difficult to find leadership training for people within the corporate world. You can send them away to fairly pricey programs, but that's not necessarily what they're looking for their lower, their entry-level management or their supervisors or even middle management. But Toastmasters has something for them. And so this is what I find really enrolls the corporation in the Toastmasters program. I talk about it being, and some of these are important because they set us up for longevity in the workplace. So I talk about it being a self-paced program. And this is really important to tell the corporation, because I've had supervisors and managers in the past phone me and say, when is Jen going to graduate from Toastmasters? I've been sending her for 2 years and she just doesn't graduate. And I've had to sit the manager down and say, like, this is self-paced. She's going at her level unless you've got an agreement with her. And I also talk about the fact that Jan may be going, we all start different places in the program. So she may have some real challenges to get started and make headway. So it's a self-paced program. The other part of that is that it is no pass or fail and there's no graduation. This is important to pair with the self-paced program. No pass or fail and no graduation. Again, I've had managers ask me when people will get their certificates. And I've explained that if they achieve a certain level, they'll get a certificate of achievement, but we don't hand out certificates for people showing up, that it's what they achieve gets recognized. So this is really an important element as well to explain. Experiential learning, and there's a huge desire for this in the corporate world. When I was in the corporate world, like up to 2 years ago, to have experiential learning. So it's not reading a textbook, it's not sitting in a classroom listening to somebody talk about it, but it's actually doing it. And so you can leave that classroom and walk back into your work site and actually apply it. And that is hugely valuable and a quick return on investment. Again, to reiterate to them that adult education principles were used when the program was designed. Our learning is done in a team environment, which is one of the transferable skills as well, is that you learn to work in a team, you learn to support one another, you learn empathy, you learn compassion, you learn that the morale gets boosted in the workplace, you learn interpersonal relationships, a lot of side benefits from that team environment. I'm clear to them that we provide the course materials that are needed, and there may be some startup equipment or supplies that would be nice to have once we get into the corporate world. I talk about peer learning because I want them to know that peer-to-peer they're going to be sharing. And depending on the environment, this is an important one because sometimes they have this belief that, our higher management level doesn't like to be in the room with our lower management, and there'll be intimidation factors, and we don't want a junior manager evaluating a senior manager. And other places, it's such a flat organization that isn't even an issue for them. They all come into the room and they all experience peer learning. So again, it's to mention it so they give due consideration to who they see being in the program. Also talk about the fact that evaluation criteria is provided, that when people are giving evaluations, we're actually teaching them to evaluate specific criteria. And that's, again, a hugely valuable transferable skill to the workplace. That there is both local and international support for the program, that they're part of an international organization, 94 years old. You know, we have an opportunity to establish some credibility for the program. Over 140 countries of the world, over 315,000 people at any one time in the program, millions of people through the graduating the program or through the program. So those kinds of things are really the things that I talk to initially to let the corporation know what's going to happen inside the classroom. One of the key things for me is to look at who is my connection. If I'm the district representative, say I'm the district representative going in to the corporate world, and I'm wanting to set a program into their corporate world, I first of all have to do my homework and know what I'm talking about and be super clear that I'm focused on them, not me. Secondly, I really want to make sure that I'm connecting with whoever's going to be in charge of this. If it's somebody who's the champion, ideally they could be the head of HR or the head of learning and development if they've got the autonomy. Or I want somebody who's got the autonomy to say, yes, this will happen. And I have HR working with me, or whatever it might be. And it'll be different for each situation. But to be really clear on who's the decision maker and who gets to pull the plug when they want to pull the plug. And because that's the person that I want to stay in contact with. I want to know what they think of the program, what the participants are saying about it, what they're hearing behind the scenes. Are we meeting their needs? And I want to give them a check-in on data and how the program's going. In the first year, I want to do it every 3 months. And after that, probably a minimum of every 6 months checking in with them. But I'll get to that a bit later on. So having that agreement in place and with that person that is going to be the working liaison with me. The couple of paradigm shifts here also is that the agreement with Toastmasters International, who we represent, is to the corporation and Toastmasters International. It is not with the individual employee that shows up. And that's really different from a community club as well. It's a different shift. So when there's issues with the program or there's not attendance, we don't run after the participants in the program. We go to the people that are sponsoring the program for us and talk to them about the conditions that need to happen for us to deliver this unique program for them. And what happens in Toastmasters is that if you step way back from Toastmasters and look at us from a long distance away, we operate in kind of a strange, unique way that doesn't happen in any other corporate training that I've ever encountered. And so we have this very unique delivery method where we put all the people in the room and they all bounce off one another and learn from one another. And that doesn't sound like anything that a corporation might want to pay for, at least not my corporation. So I talk about bringing experienced people in who are, first of all, going to provide education and that foundation and be the guides for those. And in some cases, that's the sponsors, the mentors, the coaches, but also a district liaison that may be there for the duration of that corporate program so that they're supporting the people coming and going from that corporate program and making it sustainable, or certainly helping it be sustainable. So some things there to think about as well. And some people in your district know more about this, and I encourage you to contact the district team if you want to know more about it. and have conversation, or you could contact Toastmasters International. They're selling copies of the book, or myself, whatever works for you. So just some other places to look for, or your own deep thinking and experiences of the corporate world, and make it happen. Some of the things that I looked at in terms of setting corporate programs up to be successful was that club sponsors really need to be there a minimum of 6 months, because there is so much work to do at the beginning of the program. Teaching people all the roles, what's good evaluation, what's good, how do you write a good speech, how do you actually prepare it, how do you present it, how's it evaluated, how do you be grammarian, how do you do impromptu speaking, all the feedback on that. There's so many things that without even getting into all the leadership roles. So let's talk for just a moment again about the sponsor being 6 months, mentor being a minimum of 1 year. Because really there's all the things like tuition payments. The program's going to receive proxies from international and district, which they're not going to understand what that's about. So it's an opportunity to teach them about voting, about proxies, about elections, about running for office, for leadership, all those kinds of spin-offs from there. Critical success factors, and that strategic planning for that group of people. Submission for achievements and recognition, again, is something to be taught. And then accountability, again, another thing that we can teach them by being there. And then ideally that district liaison that is there with the program on an ongoing basis. So those are just some of the things that we can talk to them or teach them, as well as all the better speaker, better leader, all the quality leader, all those skills packages that we've got that we can teach them in getting them the basics and making them how to run a good meeting, how to be efficient, on and on. So I'm using a lot of inclusive language right now because there's so many bits and pieces of all of these elements. I think I'll leave it at that right now because I'll just get into another area of, I think just very briefly, to look at how you're going to call the leaders in the program when they get involved. If the corporation is run by a president, I would suggest that you not call the leader of the Toastmaster program, who would be a president. Otherwise, the president, don't call them that. Call them the leader or the team lead or whatever you might want to call them. Find something that's compatible with the corporation, but not that sounds like their management team. The vice president of education, I might call them the education liaison. And I might use the word liaison for a lot of reasons, because those are the people that are actually going to be not moving outward and with all the participants necessarily, but much more in their leadership role would be going back into the corporation. So the education liaison person, who's the responsible for the scheduling of people, etc., in that program for their activities, may be part of the liaison team that meets with that corporate champion, along with the team lead of that group, and the Toastmaster liaison, going in there for every 3 months, 6 months, to talk about how the program's going and keep that relationship built and knowing what's going on and keeping both parties informed back and forth. If we look at VP of membership, this is the participant liaison. And so this is the person that really goes back and forth, really making sure that when they talk to communications, when they talk to HR, when they talk to learning and development, that they're ensuring that there's a minimum of 25 to 35 people in that program at all times, so that our unique delivery method can be sustained. The finance or the treasurer, I would call them the finance liaison, and this is the person that would talk to finance department and make sure that the tuition gets paid, whatever that process is. The public relations, this person might be the public relations liaison or the promotions liaison that might talk to internal communication, intranet, etc., to promote or advertise, or talk about how are we advertised in the calendar, what kind of recognition do we have for the people. Secretary, I would use this person as the data and administration, because they could collect and keep track of the achievements, both from Easy Speak, if they use Easy Speak, but the database, and then also on a regular basis, because most corporations I know track attendance at training programs, and so you also want to have that taken for accountability in the program. So those are some of the basic changes I make in that program, so that they have actual roles that are not in the club, but their leadership roles are back into the corporation where they work, which makes them pretty attractive leadership roles for people to take on. I'm going to start at the top of the list and answer any questions that you have. And could word substitution be valuable for community clubs too? Lunchtime training groups might lean more to professionalism, whereas evening clubs might be more social. Your thoughts? First of all, word substitution in some cases, absolutely. In my personal opinion, tuition should be the only word that's used anywhere in any Toastmasters program. Dues does not work. It doesn't tell us what it is, and it should be in my language. I would highly recommend tuition be used, so it's really clear that we're paying tuition to go to an education program. I pay dues to belong to Rotary, but I'm not going to school in Rotary. I'm going to do philanthropic work. In Toastmasters, I'm going to school. And so I pay tuition, and we can claim tuition certainly if it's a certain level, and we have a way of claiming that professionally. Lunchtime training groups, more professional. Yes and no. It depends. Certainly if you're downtown Toronto or Ottawa or Montreal, the good chances are that your lunch groups, whether they're community clubs or corporate programs, are professional, more professional or work-based. But that's it could be a meeting at the YWCA for young mums groups that meet at lunchtime because they can get babysitters. So it's not across the board. It really, for me, in my experience, it really depends on where you're geographically you're situated and what your pool of people is that you draw from. So when I was in India, of course, is just Toastmasters programs again, but going to meetings at whatever time of day or night or morning it was all very, very professional. There weren't social. It was all, we're here to learn. This is business. This is valuable time. We want to get in. We want to learn what we can, and we want to get out. I think that we may have a preconceived idea in North America around that because of our lifestyle and our approach, but I think it really depends on what your base of members and where they're coming from. So hopefully that answers that. Are our marketing materials for corporate training groups being modified according to these lessons, or is that a slow training coming? Well, first of all, Toastmasters International right now has a board committee that is looking at corporate initiatives. Let me back up for a moment. I've been lobbying in a very quiet, modest way for about 8 years, talking about corporate programs, how I like to do them differently. And I had an experience a couple of years ago where I went into a corporate program that was set up like a corporate club, and I could see right away that it was not going to survive. And I had been named as a sponsor for the program, and I left after talking to the corporate person who had invited us into that corporation, where they actually stated that they had no expectations for the program, and they didn't care what was happening in the program. So I went out and I withdrew my name as a sponsor for that club, because I said I couldn't with integrity be involved and call that a Toastmasters program, because it wasn't. As a result of talking about this for a long time and talking to world headquarters, talking to candidates about this that run for office, talking to board members about this, having been there myself, talking to world headquarters staff, they actually, and I contacted them when I started writing my book this year, and they read the book before it was printed and wrote in the book for me. And they invited me to present on the world stage at International this past year and encouraged the district leaders to attend, as I understand. So I saw that as an endorsement. It's not that this is going to be adopted straight across the board by the board, because it states right in the front of my book that there is no, that there's no expectation at this moment that the board would adopt all or any of these recommendations or suggestions. And my whole idea of this is that this is a step to do things better than they're being done. It's not necessarily the final way, but it is a different way. And I've done it this way and had much better results and sustainability and reception in the corporate world. So it's just an option for people to look at. And again, it's just one option to adapt what works in your environment and what works for you. There will be steps, certainly in corporate initiatives that the board is working on, but when you work with a board, it is slow moving, and there may be something that comes out in a few years, couple of years. I don't know what the time frame is, but I do know that Toastmasters International is also offering this book for sale and supporting it in that way. So I'll leave it at that. Now you know all that I know on that topic. Question: perhaps carefully examining the value of each of all our training exercises, something all groups could do. Perhaps we do things because we've always done it that way and now it's all we know. Your perspective on the value of an exercise, of examining the value of our exercises. Absolutely. This is one of the things that my brain loves to do. When everything gets rote and we all talk this Toastmasters speak, and we all talk this secret language, and we all have this code, and we all file in, and we have a certain place where we sit, and you're sitting in my chair, and the expectations, and we're all on automatic pilot. That's when I like to say, whoa, stop. If we're unconscious, how much are we learning? How much of this really works? That's one of the things that I love to do. I love to look at things that are and say, where are the gaps? Where does this no longer serve us? How can this be improved? Just like when we were building pathways, it was to tear everything right down. It's the same as building a house to renovate. You can't walk in and you've just got to tear the walls down and start. So I'm a fan and a real supporter of absolutely examining the value of the current practices. A couple of years ago, pointing to share is that my home club had been about 30 members, and we suddenly grew to 50 plus members. And we had a meeting, the president and the executive and myself, and we had a meeting and we actually redeveloped the meeting agenda. And it was the most exciting process that we'd gone through for a long time. Yeah, we had 50 members, but what were we going to do with them all? And so we built a long-term plan of when we got to 60, how we'd split and have 2 clubs of 30. We divided all the people that we currently had, and we just created this agenda within an hour and 10 minutes. We didn't extend the time, but we developed an agenda that could meet the needs of those people, and it was so invigorating. And the excitement in the club to do something different, and how challenging it was for us to get out of the automatic way. And I think that that's really valuable all the time to do. So I'm a fan of that idea. Thank you for that question. Okay, we have a lot of corporate clubs with low membership. In several cases, it seems that the company has removed itself, no longer pays the dues. These clubs do have members walking the halls, inviting people to join. What would you recommend for that scenario? Close the club. I would never recommend closing the club unless it's closing. I think there's an opportunity to re-enroll the corporation. In lots of cases, I've gone to what they call corporate clubs. Now, corporate clubs for me, on our definition, is organizations that create an in-house program. They create in-house for their people, and in some cases they pay the tuition, in some cases they don't, in some cases they give the time, in some cases they don't. Often they want to have their employees do one or the other. Often, sometimes it's reimbursement, but I think there, again, there's different ways of setting that up, because for me, I like to say, well, Toastmasters is like any other education program you're bringing in for communication and leadership. Let's schedule it in the calendar and have it on a regular cycle through your corporation. And do you want to have it on Tuesday afternoons at 3, or do you want to have it on Thursday mornings at 10? It'll be for an hour, and we need a minimum of 20 people in it. And so if the program is not full of people, I would suggest that, first of all, there's a few places I look. First of all, was it sold as public speaking? And did people even say those words? Because if they do, I would forbid them. Toastmasters was rebranded years and years and years and years ago to not be a public speaking program, communication and leadership program. I think way back, like probably more than 20 years ago, I think that it was changed to communication. I would look at that. I would look at what kind of program did we actually sell the corporation, and what is the involvement of the corporation? Do they see us as professional development, or do they see us as one of those nice add-on things that happens at lunchtime or after work? And that's where we start to run into difficulty, because we're like the poor cousin that gets squeezed in or after with whatever energy somebody's got left. So I would love to go back and re-enroll the corporation with the Toastmasters program and talk about the unique delivery and how we're going to support it, and that their responsibility is to ensure that it's in the training calendar, that there's participants in the program, and when there's not sufficient participants in the program, that the program could be canceled. So in that case, if it's been set up that way, then it's no surprise when you go to see training and say, we don't have sufficient people in the program to deliver this, our unique delivery method. Because the unique delivery method in Toastmasters is that experiential learning. And we say right in the paperwork that we must have a minimum of 20 participants for that unique delivery. So that becomes one of those requirements for the corporation to meet for us to be there. You know, the consequences of all of this discussion take us to the place where, what do we do when the corporation doesn't want to play anymore? Well, we don't get to play with them. Then we look at how do we work with them to keep the program viable without us running the hallways, because again, now we sound like a social club rather than a professional development program. Thanks for that question, Kimberly. And for me, what I would do is go back into the contact person and find out how you can integrate the program into the corporation, where they are responsible and we are responsible for our bringing the curriculum and ensuring the unique delivery of it, and they are responsible for the people being there. Some of it's going to be changing the mindset, because in some cases we've gone into corporations where we've known there's existing Toastmasters and we've built it on them being there, and they've sustained and looked after the program, and then when they cease to be there, the program fails. So we have to get the Toastmasters program in there on its own merits and get it in place and get the corporation integrated, or get the program integrated into the corporation. And the agreements that here's what we bring and here's what you bring. Are there any other questions? we're kind of out of time, I think, but I'm not out of information or enthusiasm.
Well, Pat, on behalf of all of us, we thank you for the time you've given and the wisdom that you shared with us, the encouragement to introspect on what we're doing, why we're doing it, and to think critically, to think clearly about the meaning of how we express things, in particular to the corporate clubs in this case, but to all of our clubs. I think that is, for me, that's been immensely helpful. Thank you,
Thanks so much for having me. And it's something that I just think we can make a difference, and I wouldn't be afraid to go into any corporation to reset this program, as long as you're super clear and the district is also set up to support it. And just, business has changed, we've learned lessons, and own up to what hasn't worked in the past and reset it into the corporation. And if people want to reach out, feel free to reach out to me with questions. And I'm at Pat the Trainer at shaw.ca. So I'll just write it in. If you have questions, just if you would put in the subject line, corporate program question or something like that, so I know you're not spamming me. So thank you again. Thanks, Craig, for hosting me. And thank you, everyone, for showing up and sharing some of your time with me today. And I wish you the very best if you're a member of a corporate club or corporate program. If you're looking at going into it, if you're area or division director, whatever your role might be, I wish you the best. And hey, Toastmasters.
Thank you, Pat. Good night, everybody.
Good night.